Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would take a look at this little video about this one channel called Blue Blood Sports TV. And I thought that it was very particularly interesting because apparently, in recent news, at least from what Blue Blood Sports TV has heard, and I don't doubt this news because I think that Saul Canelo Alvarez is heading in this direction. This is somewhat what I predicted. But Saul Canelo Alvarez, apparently, after the Ilunga Makabu fight, if that fight does happen next, and I do believe that that fight will more than likely happen next, that Canelo, after the Ilunga Makabu fight, that he more than likely is going to try and unify 175 pounds, or he more than likely is going to have a fight at 175 pounds. And I think that that's not necessarily a bad move. Now, certain people may disagree. And Blue Blood Sports TV, he is one of those people that believe personally that Canelo Alvarez, once again, is maneuvering inside and out of the weight divisions. But of course, once again, a certain amount of these guys, and I'm not saying that I always disagree with what maybe, a Blue Blood Sports TV or, some of these other guys may say. But of course, I don't think anyone disagrees 100% of the time. But bottom line is this. These guys do have a certain narrative to push because at the end of the day, they don't want someone like a Saul Canelo Alvarez at the number one pound for pound spot. And that's why whoever he fights, there's always an excuse. That's why when I reviewed a Dante's Boxing Nation video, what did he say, when he was debatably going to face Jamal Charlo next or supposedly going to face him next? He said, oh, well, Canelo should face him now because Jamal Charlo looks vulnerable. So it doesn't really matter who Canelo Alvarez faces next. There's always going to be some sort of, what if, ands, or buts when it comes down to it. There's always going to be an asterisk next to it. As long overall, as Canelo Alvarez is debatably the number one pound for pound fighter because once again, they don't want him to be the number one pound for pound fighter. It is what it is. But like I said, just taking a look at things logically and objectively, at least in my view, Canelo Alvarez at the current moment in time, I don't think that there is really any other debate. I think that he would have to be the number one pound for pound fighter. I don't see another fighter out there that, not only just in terms of skills when it comes down, I mean, there's a couple of other fighters that you can debate. Maybe they're on the same level as Canelo Alvarez in terms of skill set. Maybe such as a Terrence Crawford and Usyk and, maybe a couple of other people. Maybe for their weight divisions, they're extremely talented, but maybe they wouldn't be on the same level as a Canelo, like maybe a Tyson Fury. But at the end of the day, I do believe, at least as of the current moment, that Canelo Alvarez, he is sort of on his own plateau. He is on his own playing field. It just is what it is. And I do believe that Canelo is the current number one pound for pound king until proven otherwise. Or maybe until Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence can get a possible victory over one another. But if Canelo Alvarez, of course, does plan to unify 175, which I do believe is very, very possible, then of course that is going to be another part of history for Saul Canelo Alvarez's career. But anyways, Blue Blood Sports TV, he's going to talk about it. Let's tune in.
What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, we got some breaking, interesting news. As 4-division world champion Mexican superstar boxer, who is currently the undisputed super middleweight world champion superstar, Saul Canelo Alvarez, as expected, has decided to bypass going up to cruiserweight to take on Makabu for Makabu's
Blue Blood Sports TV, if you didn't catch it, said, as expected. So basically, what is he really trying to say here? Basically, what he's saying is that Canelo Alvarez is basically taking another easy task again. But I don't necessarily know how going to light heavyweight. I would somewhat understand people's perspectives about the Ilunga Makabu fight because I don't think anyone thinks that Makabu is really an A-grade skilled fighter. But some of those people at the light heavyweight division, not only are they real punchers and real decent athletes, but certain people like Dimitri Bivol and Artur Beterbiev, those are real A-grade fighters. Those are guys that have a very big amateur background. They have a very good Olympic pedigree. And on top of that, they're very great athletes. Those two fighters especially, they're no joke.
WBC title to become a 5-division world champion. Now Canelo Alvarez plans to become undisputed at light heavyweight after he witnessed, as predicted, unified light...
As predicted. You can tell Blue Blood Sports TV is so pissed off. It is what it is. But I never get these narratives when it comes down to it, because these guys that try to promote the narrative, they're saying, oh, well, here Canelo goes again, avoiding David Benavidez, avoiding Jamal Charlo, avoiding Demetrius Andrade. Do Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, and David Benavidez, now don't get me wrong, once again, I would like to see those fights. But if Canelo is really trying to unify the 175-pound division, and if he really is going to face Artur Beterbiev or Dimitri Bivol, two fighters that are really, really, really great fighters, I mean, come on, can we really criticize Canelo to a great degree because he faces those fighters over Jamal Charlo, David Benavidez, and Demetrius Andrade, who really, let's be honest, even when they face B and C grade competition, their performances really look suspect anyway. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still would love to see those fights. I think that all those fights are great fights. That's not me saying that I would not want to see them happen. But I never get this narrative to where, Canelo's, unifying the light heavyweight division now, where he's facing this fighter now, and he needs to face Charlo and Andrade and David Benavidez. But, well, it's like, have those fighters never looked vulnerable? Has David Benavidez and Demetrius Andrade never been knocked down before in their fights? Didn't Demetrius Andrade get knocked down in a couple of his fights? Didn't he have a very piss-poor performance against that one British fighter? Not in his most recent fight, but the fight before that. Didn't he kind of underwhelm in that performance? Didn't Jamal Charlo have several performances in his career where he underwhelmed? Didn't David Benavidez in a certain fight have a split decision victory over against a C grade fighter? Now, of course, that was a while ago. My point being is this: I don't understand why these fighters are put on such a high pedestal compared to so many of these other fighters. That's why these narratives to where people like to say, oh well, Canelo, he's only facing these Caucasian fighters. Yeah, but some of these Caucasian fighters, they're better than David Benavidez. They're better than Jamal Charlo. They're better overall than Demetrius Andrade, or a bigger challenge for Canelo at least. It just is what it is. You can't sit here and tell me at the end of the day, at least I'm not believing it personally, that Demetrius Andrade or Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez, who look suspect in half their performances anyway, at least some of them, when it comes down to it, you can't tell me that they're on the same level as an Artur Beterbiev or someone overall as a Dimitri Bivol. It just is what it is. Now, if you think personally because, maybe certain things that maybe they could provide more challenges for Canelo in certain areas, maybe because they're near the same size, and maybe Canelo, because he's the smaller, slicker guy, he can give those bigger guys trouble. Well, that's up to you. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, but like I said, I can't criticize Canelo overall to a great extent if he's going to go fight Artur Beterbiev or Dimitri Bivol or unify the 175-pound division. And I just reviewed a video all in all a few days ago, I believe, where Dante's Boxing Nation, who all in all, of course, is a super fan of Canelo, and I say that sarcastically because we all know he tries to tear him down. Even Dante's Boxing Nation has went on the narrative and tried to say that 175 is an extremely talented division, and that Canelo Alvarez, that it would be in one of his best interests to try and unify there. So will these guys give Canelo Alvarez credit for unifying the 175-pound division? We'll see. I doubt it, but we'll see what happens.
Heavyweight undefeated world champion, Russian superstar boxer.
Because let me just put it in this perspective. If this was Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Andrade, if they were the one going up to 168 and facing a Callum Smith or Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders, once again, it's no coincidence that when Demetrius Andrade and Billy Joe Saunders was supposed to happen, all these same channels, or some of these guys, they all said that Billy Joe Saunders versus Demetrius Andrade was a super fight, that it was the biggest fight of their careers. But when Canelo takes that fight, all of a sudden, Canelo Alvarez, it's a cherry pick. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to say that Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, and David Benavidez, that they're better athletes and that, in your opinion, they're bigger threats than Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, that's up to you. I think that personally, they're all around the same level, but I would at least understand that perspective. Because, of course, Andrade, Benavidez, and Charlo, I would say that they're better athletes, but you can debate all in all which ones are the better fighters. I would say that Andrade probably is the most tricky style for Canelo, debatably, just because of his size and, he has a decent amateur background and, he can be decently slick. But, they're all somewhat around the same level. But Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol, those are two fighters that are on a whole nother level.
Artur Beterbiev.
Because, like I said, if Demetrius Andrade or Jamal Charlo, if they were going up facing those fighters, we all know what they'd be saying. And I already proved that last week with the video that I reviewed of Dante's Boxing Nation.
Defended his titles. Artur Beterbiev, he holds the WBC and the IBF light heavyweight titles, okay? Artur Beterbiev, I believe it's 18 wins, no losses, no draws, 18 wins by way of knockout. And Artur Beterbiev, He beat Marcus Brown defending his titles. So with that said, he didn't look that well, right? He didn't look like.
Actually, I tend to disagree. I don't understand this narrative of Artur Beterbiev. He didn't look so good. There were certain boxers like Andre Ward and Tony Bellew that they said something like that. But I mean, Artur Beterbiev. This is my personal opinion. I think Artur Beterbiev. Now, do I think that Canelo more than likely beats an Artur Beterbiev? I think that I would say it's about a 50-50 fight, or maybe 60-40 in favor of Saul Canelo Alvarez. But in my opinion, if there is a type of person that has the biggest chance of possibly defeating a Canelo, it is either a Dimitri Bivol or that of a Artur Beterbiev. Because they are great athletes. They have a great punching power. Dimitri Bivol, if you talk about him, he has a great hand speed. He has a great foot movement. Both of them have a very good amateur pedigree when it comes down to it. Both of those guys are grade skilled fighters. I have no problem with those fights happening whatsoever. Like I said that after the Ilunga Makabu fight, I would criticize Canelo if there was no A-class fighters after that. But if he's going to be facing one of the champions at 175. Now, Joe Smith Jr., for example, apparently that is the move that Canelo was going to make. I don't necessarily think that Joe Smith is an A-grade fighter because he has a few losses in his career already, even to some fighters that I would not claim are that great, like maybe a Sullivan Barrera. But at the end of the day, it would be a step in the right direction.
The Artur Beterbiev of the past. He looked vulnerable. Artur Beterbiev, he looked slow. He looked predictable. His power, he wore down Marcus Brown after a while, but Marcus Brown was turning him. He looked slow. He looked lethargic. And many fighters after that fight.
I don't know why these people overall are saying that Artur Beterbiev looks slow and lethargic. Has Artur Beterbiev ever been, Barry Allen in there? Has he ever been the Flash? Overall, I believe that's the name of the Flash. For those of you that don't know it, I think that's his name. But when it comes down to the overall, has he ever looked like, the fastest man alive? Artur Beterbiev is not a dude that is known for his speed. He's not a dude all in all that is usually known for being an extremely slick fighter. What he's known for is putting on the pressure and basically, very good on the inside, very decent counter-punching ability, But the thing is about Artur Beterbiev, even though he is a little bit older in his career, I believe he's about 36 years old now, so he is getting up there in age. But the bottom line is this: Artur Beterbiev is a legitimate fighter. Artur Beterbiev, you could personally debate, he is one of the top 10 pound-for-pound fighters in the world. You could legitimately debate that. So at the end of the day, this is a real deal fight. If Canelo plans to face an Artur Beterbiev or Dimitri Bivol, that's why I'm saying, I can't criticize Canelo to this great degree if he is going to be taking these fights, because who else is really going to be taking these fights? It just is what it is. I'm sorry.
Predicted that. Expect Canelo.
But like I said, Artur Beterbiev, if you take a look at him against Marcus Brown, I don't know where this narrative is coming from that he looked weak. I mean, yeah, sure, he lost the first couple of rounds, but, even though they're still a little bit competitive, but that was to be expected. Artur Beterbiev is a person that, I believe had a decently long layoff when it came down to it, or at least has not been fighting as much within the past couple of years, ever since, of course, COVID-19 and overall, the sickness. When it comes down to it, I was trying to call it something else, but I can't remember overall the word for it. But when it comes down to it, all in all, ever since those situations, some of these fighters have not been fighting as much. So, of course, against Marcus Brown, a person that, yes, in his last big fight against Jean Pascal, he did suffer a loss, but it was a decently competitive fight. And on top of that, unfortunately, it ended up being cut short because Marcus Brown, he did not have the time to correct his mistakes because it was stopped because of a head clash. But Marcus Brown was also the same dude that defeated Badou Jack at pretty much the best point in time in his career. Badou Jack was a person that at one point in time was at least an A- fighter. So Marcus Brown, in my opinion, he wasn't coming into that Artur Beterbiev fight as an A+ fighter. But there was a certain amount of people that thought Marcus Brown was good enough that, that Marcus Brown could possibly pull off the upset. So obviously, Marcus Brown was not just some chump. Marcus Brown was coming into this fight with a very decent Olympic pedigree and a person that had a very decent win over Badou Jack. But, of course, was, some of his flaws were exposed against Jean Pascal. But, that was a very competitive fight, of course, until its ending, unfortunately, caused by a head clash. But when it comes down to it, Artur Beterbiev, in my opinion, he actually had the most impressive performance of his career. Artur Beterbiev completely dominated Marcus Brown after those first 2 rounds. Even if you want to talk about his other big fight against Gvozdyk, in my opinion, was an all-around better fighter probably than Marcus Brown. You know, he had a very good Olympic pedigree, and he had that great win over Adonis Stevenson, even though he was a bit older. But when it came down to it, all in all, you know, he completely was able to outperform Gvozdyk in the second half of that fight. But it's not like Artubidibiv looked like, you know, like he was a $6 million man in that fight or anything. There were certain times where he was hurt. There were certain times to where he was backed up. There were certain times where he would lose rounds. He lost a few rounds in that fight. He was hit multiple times in that fight. Sometimes he can look a little bit stiff. Sometimes he can look a little bit hittable. I personally think that this was the best performance of Artubidibyev's career. I thought that his movement actually looked a little bit better than what he usually was, even though he does still tend to be a little bit stiff. His defensive responsibility was very good. There was very few flush shots that Marcus Brown was able to hit him with. For 36 years old, I thought that he looked pretty fantastic.
Alvarez to go up to light heavyweight and look to become undisputed there, because there seems to be some vulnerability at light heavyweight. And right on cue, Canelo Alvarez has informed that he will bypass the fight with Makubu at cruiserweight. And now,
once again, this is the narrative that I don't get. Basically, what Blue Blood Sports TV is trying to allege is that Canelo Alvarez sees some vulnerability there, so that's why he's going after Artubidibiv and Dimitri Bivol. You can argue maybe in certain stances that there's been vulnerability, but all in all, they still have put on somewhat of decent performances. And I mean, once again, if you're going to try to allege that Canelo was ducking David Benavidez and Andrade and Jamal Charlo, you know, because apparently there's been no vulnerability with them, that just wouldn't make any sense. I mean, you can try to allege that Canelo has done some maneuvering. I believe that maybe he's done some maneuvering here and there, but at the end of the day, like I said, has Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez and what's the other dude's name, Demetrius Andrade, have they really showed absolutely no vulnerability? Does anyone truly think that those fighters are bigger challenges for Canelo than that of an Artubidibiv or Dimitri Bivol? I mean, it's just my personal opinion, but I do not. I just don't. Not only are they bigger than Canelo, they are greater athletes than any of those fighters that I just mentioned, and they're just better all-around boxers. Like, you can legitimately debate, once again, that Artubidibiv is a debatable top 10 pound-for-pound fighter. You can debate that. He has 2 A-grade wins. He has one over Marcus Brown. He has one over, Alexander Gvozdyk. Is Demetrius Andrade a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter? I think that he's very talented, but no, you can't place him there. You know, you talk about Jamal Charlo. I think he's very talented as well. He's not in the top 10 pound-for-pound. You know, I think David Benavidez is decently talented, but you can't put him in the top 10 pound-for-pound. It's like, I don't understand these narratives. It just is what it is. But, then Gervonta Tank Davis, he'll go fight Isaac Cruz, and everyone is saying, oh, man, this fight is banging. Like, what are you talking about?
Canelo Alvarez is looking to fight Joe Smith soon. Joe Smith has a fight coming up, I believe. Joe Smith holds the WBO title, okay, at light heavyweight.
Yes, he does. I believe he has a mandatory defense against a fighter by the name of Callum Johnson. I believe a British fighter that is not too good. So Joe Smith Jr. more than likely will win that fight. And if I had to guess, Canelo more than likely will go after him. Because Joe Smith, he is the weakest of all the champions there right now. And I think that that's a good, fight returning back to light heavyweight. Because Joe Smith Jr., he's a person that he's a good test. He's not a person that, in my opinion, has A-grade skills, but he is a person that has, I would say, B-grade skills. He is a person that can box, although he got a little bit late into the game because I think his first job was being a construction worker. So kind of like Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, he ended up making something of himself, but he was, he's not as sharp as some of the other boxers out there because he got a little bit later into the game. But he is a person that has a lot of power, and he does have certain skills. So that would be a great return to light heavyweight if you were able to get Joe Smith Jr.
Heavyweight. So he's looking to fight Joe Smith, his first fight at light heavyweight. Why? Because Canelo Alvarez, he held the WBO title after he beat former 2-time light heavyweight world champion superstar boxer Sergey Crusher Kovalev. So he has a direct path to the light heavyweight mandatory position. Why? Because that's the way the WBO operates. Okay, if you hold their title, they will, and when you move up in weight, they will automatically push you in front, the head of the line, and allow you to become the mandatory for whomever holds the belt at the next weight class you're choosing to go up in. And so, since he's undisputed at super middle,
that's right, and that's the same thing that happened with Terrence Mud Crawford versus Jeff Horn. And I didn't hear any of these same channels bitch, moan, and complain about how Jeff Horn was the weakest link, even when he clearly was. And Joe Smith is all around better fighter than that of a Jeff Horn. But of course, not even just talking about a Joe Smith, but if Canelo next year especially does face out of an Artur Beterbiev for Dimitri Bivol, that is a great matchup. That is a great fight. You cannot criticize Canelo Alvarez too much for taking that fight.
Wait, okay, the path for him to go up and fight Joe Smith for the WBO title is pretty simple. Okay, it's easy to come by. So with that said, he's going to now go up and fight Joe Smith Jr., right, for Joe Smith's WBO title. With that said, Joe Smith, I believe he has a fight coming up, if I'm not mistaken. And, after that, Canelo Alvarez is going to petition to become Joe Smith. Is mandatory. Joe Smith is 27 wins, 3 losses, no draws, 21 wins by way of knockout, 32 years of age, 6 foot tall with a 76-inch arm reach. He's going to face Caleb Johnson January 15th. And then after that, Canelo Alvarez is going to look to fight Joe Smith Jr., okay? Joe Smith Jr. Has a lot of power. Obviously, he's known for his power, and he's known for knocking Bernard Hopkins out the ring, okay? Remember when he, famously knocked Bernard Hopkins out the ring. Now, Joe Smith, he lost to Artur Beterbiev. He's lost some big fights in him.
No, actually, he didn't lose to Artur Beterbiev. I believe that he lost to Dimitri Bivol. And I believe that's how Dimitri Bivol got the belt. But I could be wrong about that. Someone correct me.
His career, Dimitri Bivol, excuse me, not Artur Beterbiev. He lost to Dimitri Bivol.
There we go.
He lost to Sullivan Barrera, but he's a tough customer. He has power in both hands. He's very strong. He's very big. And that's going to be a challenge for Canelo Alvarez as far as his power. But Joe Smith is not the most skilled guy from New York. Joe Smith is, a power puncher. And Canelo Alvarez will find a way to beat Joe Smith because he has flaws on the defense.
I agree. I think that Canelo Alvarez more than likely will beat Joe Smith, and I think that he'll probably beat him handily. But I think that actually, once again, is a great reintroduction to that of the light heavyweight division. Of course, he fought Sergey Kovalev, so some may ask, well, Canelo already fought Sergey Kovalev, and you allege that he was a great fighter at the time. Well, he wasn't the same fighter when he fought Andre Ward, obviously, but, because he already been knocked down a couple times. But Sergey Kovalev still was a decent fighter. I don't think that he was top 10 pound for pound or anything at that point in time, but he would have been like maybe top 20, top 30. So it still was a very decent win. It was at least an A- win.
It's an A, okay? And so with that said, Canelo Alvarez plans on fighting Joe Smith, and then Canelo Alvarez plans on fighting Artur Beterbiev is being reported. So he's looking to fight Joe Smith Jr., then he's looking to fight Artur Beterbiev. So it looks like Canelo Alvarez is going to attempt to fight Joe Smith Jr. in that May area. Cinco de Mayo weekend is when Canelo Alvarez comes back. Now, Joe Smith is definitely going to take that opportunity should he beat Caleb Johnson or whoever wins, Caleb Johnson or Joe Smith.
Of course, anyone would take the Canelo Alvarez opportunity because Canelo Alvarez is basically, in terms of boxing, he is the face of boxing. And, if you want a real opportunity, you take an opportunity like that. It is what it is. So it doesn't really matter overall who it is when it comes down to it. Like Dante's Boxing Nation, I reviewed a video and he said, oh, well, I don't want to say that Caleb Plant purposely lost to Canelo, but he gave up his belt to the highest bidder. Well, it might have been a part of that, but everyone wants to face Canelo Alvarez right now because, once again, Canelo is pretty much intuitively known, whether people want to admit it or not. He's the face of boxing. It is what it is. He runs the sport right now. It just is what it is. Same thing with Floyd when he was in boxing. Manny Pacquiao kind of shared it a little bit as well. Roy Jones Jr. when he was the #1 pound for pound fighter. Sugar Ray Leonard back in the 80s. Is what it is.
Canelo Alvarez is going to be the mandatory. And, that's going to be the biggest payday of their career. So they're definitely going to jump at the opportunity to be able to fight Canelo Alvarez for that massive payday, okay? And then, in September, he'll more than likely look to fight Artur Beterbiev. Artur Beterbiev, again, is 17 wins. I think I said 18. 17 wins, no loss, no draws. 17 wins by way of knockout. 36 years of age, 5'11.5" with a 73-inch arm reach. Like I said, he just defeated Marcus Brown via knockout. That was back December 17th of this year. So then after that, you can expect Canelo Alvarez to look to fight Dimitri Bivol at the end of the year for his WBA title and look to become undefeated, undisputed champion.
If Canelo Alvarez were to do that, it would be very, very hard to surpass him as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Even if Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. were to get a victory over each other, because, like I said, if Canelo were to able to truly get a very clear victory over Artur Beterbiev, that would really overall solidify him, in my opinion, as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Because Artur Beterbiev right now, in my opinion, is debatably a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter. If he's not top 10, he's top 15.
In 2 separate weight classes, okay? The path is there for Canelo Alvarez and history, okay? He's the first Mexican-born fighter to hold all 4 major sanction belts and be the undisputed champion and the lineal champion, the Ring Magazine title. And he can do so very well at light heavyweight, okay? 7 pounds north. He's fought there before, okay? And that'll give Canelo Alvarez the ability to, grow into cruiserweight, because now he's just going 15 pounds north of his 175-pound limit.
That's if overall Canelo Alvarez does eventually decide to fight again at cruiserweight. I'm not sure. But if he does unify the light heavyweight division, I would like to see the David Benavidez, Jamal Charlo, and Demetrius Andrade fights. Especially Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, because I think that those fights would be very, very big just in terms of a publicity standpoint. I wouldn't give Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez more of a chance over Canelo than Artur Beterbiev or Dimitri Bivol, in my opinion. But I think all in all that those fights would do great numbers.
So more than likely he'll come in about 185 for his fights at light heavyweight. So with that said, as I stated, Canelo Alvarez is not going to lose. He's not going to lose to Joe Smith. He's not going to lose to Artur Beterbiev, and he's not going to lose to Dimitri Bivol. I believe the biggest challenge for him is going to be Dimitri Bivol, who's undefeated.
So if Canelo isn't going to lose to any of those fighters, who specifically is Canelo going to lose to? Now, I maybe overall, would understand certain Demetrius Andrade people, or certain people saying, well, Demetrius Andrade, he does have that somewhat slick style and he's decently lengthy. I would understand that, but does anyone really look at Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, at least from a realistic standpoint, and say, wow, that guy is really going to go in there and tear Canelo Alvarez up? I mean, I just don't see it. I think that Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, I think that they're good competitors, but I think that they have a little bit too many holes in their game.
Because Dimitri Bivol has boxing ability, he can move around the ring. He's quick for his size. He's agile. He's not truly a
I agree.
light heavyweight himself. He's like a super middleweight who campaigns at light heavyweight simply because he just couldn't get an opportunity that he was looking for. So you got Dimitri Bivol. That'll be his toughest challenge, and Canelo Alvarez will be undisputed in 2 separate weight classes. History will be made. That's what he's chasing.
Well, all in all, if he were able to defeat Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol, that would be a tremendous accomplishment. I mean, that's a tremendous accomplishment. I don't even know how to put it really into words. I mean, Dimitri Bivol and Artur Beterbiev, those aren't any jokes of fighters. Now some people may try to spread the narrative, oh, well, Canelo's still doing the NBF. He's not fighting any black fighters. But like I said, there's only, really, when we want to talk about elite black fighters, there's really only 2 elite black fighters that Canelo has not fought remaining in his career, and that's Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo. And I think that those fights should happen eventually. But in my opinion, when you just talk about it, a lot of people, they try to come up with this narrative of, well, because black fighters are usually the most dominant in the sport, those are the guys that are going to give Canelo the most amount of problems. Well, I don't think you can always look at things that way when it comes down to. We can take a look at the heavyweight division right now. We can say, well, since black fighters have usually throughout the heavyweights history usually been the most talented throughout the heavyweight division, that usually means that black fighters are the best within that division. But as of right now, Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, they're the top 2. It just is what it is. Now, if you want to say that that's a little bit more proven, then overall, what Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, overall, if maybe they would give Canelo more of a troubling case, I could somewhat understand it. But at the end of the day, like I said, I never got this argument overall of Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, especially being these guys that are really going to put Canelo Alvarez in big, huge trouble. Don't get me wrong. I think that they're great competitors. I think that those both are great fighters. But when I really take a look at those guys fight, I mean, there's a few fights that I take a look overall in their career, and I'm like, I think that they're good. I think that they're decently great. I think that they're A fighters, but I think that they're A- fighters. Like I said, so I put them on the same level overall as pretty much a Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant. Now, do I think that they're greater athletes? Sure, but I don't overall think that they have the boxing ability to beat Saul Canelo Alvarez. I just don't think so.
in history.
Once again, that doesn't mean that I would not want to see those fights. But I just don't understand the narratives of people saying, well, Canelo was avoiding Charlo and David Benavidez to fight Artur Beterbiev. That doesn't even make any sense. Because Artur Beterbiev, in my opinion, all around, is a way bigger challenge than any of those guys. I mean, don't get me wrong. Certain fighters, when they move up certain weight classes, especially when they're decently outsized, sometimes it can be a cherry pick. But Canelo is not some Mikey Garcia. He's not a person that is moving up to, a weight class to where, it looks like he, it just doesn't stand a chance. The only reason why Mikey Garcia took the Errol Spence fight and didn't take the Vasily Lomachenko fight is because he would have rather got his ass kicked against Errol Spence than a Vasily Lomachenko or one of the other lighter weight fighters that he did not want to face. Mikey was a dude that was very strategic and overall was very, he was basically slithering his way in and out of certain weight divisions to face B and C grade fighters. But that's why when you take a look at Mikey Garcia's career, he has 40-some fights in his resume. He has no A-grade wins in his career. You can tell which fighters overall are doing that and which fighters are not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Canelo has not maneuvered here and there. But to say that he just does it for every fight and he's clearly always going after the weakest opponents, that's just, it's ridiculous.
And the opportunity.
Because take a look at Mikey Garcia's record compared to that of Canelo. Canelo has Lara, he has Golovkin, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Danny Jacobs, Sergey Kovalev, when he at least was an A- fighter, Miguel Cotto. I mean, Austin Trout. How many more names do you want me to list off? When you talk about Mikey, the best wins in his career are against like Roman Martinez and Orlando Salido and, Adrian Broner. Like those are and Jesse Vargas, all B-grade fighters. At least, pretty much, right? When it comes to Canelo, you can debate that all the fighters that I just listed off are like A-grade fighters. That's why I never understood this whole entire narrative of, Canelo's always going after the weakest guys. There's certain times in his career where he's gone after weaker guys, but there's also a lot of the times as well to where he has went after A-grade fighters. It just is what it is.
He has presented itself, and now Canelo Alvarez is going to challenge himself by going up to 175. Now, again, some people are going to view this as Canelo Alvarez sees an opening, as he does. It's strategic, as it is. But these are still risky fights because all of these guys are definitely bigger than Canelo Alvarez.
Well, let me give you some sort of credit for that. I think all in all that your overall objective still seemed to tear down Canelo Alvarez, but at least let me give you a certain amount of credit for that. Now, the big question is, when it comes to other channels, will someone like a Dante's Boxing Nation or Aki TV or Boxing Eagle overall keep their word? Because we all know with them, they'll say anything. they don't care what they say within overall their content.
They're stronger than Canelo Alvarez, and they have a lot of power. All three guys have power, okay?
Well, let's not even just talk about power. Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol, those are highly skilled fighters.
Evil has power. Artur Beterbiev for sure has power, and Joe Smith for sure has power. So, and they have arm reach advantages over Canelo Alvarez. Okay, so they have physical advantages over Canelo Alvarez that he's going to have to overcome. I think this road to becoming undisputed at light heavyweight is going to be more difficult than Canelo Alvarez's road to undisputed at super middleweight.
Well, of course, because these guys overall are going to be bigger. They're going to be stronger. Some of these guys you can even debate are debatably more talented. Now, I would debate that Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, they're more slicker than that overall of a Artur Beterbiev or, Dimitri Bivol debatably. But when it comes down to it all in all, that doesn't always mean that they're going to have more of a troubling style because you can try to be a slicker. That doesn't always mean that you're going to be like on the Floyd Mayweather or Araceli Lara level. It is what it is.
Okay, I think that, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, and Caleb Smith, they're not on the level of Artur Beterbiev. I think Artur Beterbiev beats all.
I would agree with that.
All three of those guys. I think Dimitri.
Well, of course he beats all those guys because not only is Artur Beterbiev highly skilled, but he's way bigger than those guys. So it's like, even if you want to bring up that point once again, if you're one of these guys that are alleging that Canelo is ducking, does anyone truly, just raise the hands when it comes down to it. Does anyone truly believe that Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, or David Benavidez, do any of those guys beat Artur Beterbiev at his best? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. He'd knock all those guys out. Maybe Demetrius Andrade could survive. Maybe Andrade would have a chance. But I'm not even sure about Andrade. Once again, everyone always loves to, they always love to put Andrade on such this high level. But every single time that I've seen Andrade, It is. There's this one quote by this one classic comedian named Patrice O'Neal, and I'm not trying to disrespect Demetrius Andrade here. Patrice O'Neal. For those of you that have never seen his stand up, go ahead watch it. Some of it is good stuff. Patrice O'Neal said this one thing overall about this comedian named Jeff Ross. He basically said that everyone says that your stand up is so legendary. It's basically like the Loch Ness monster. Everyone says how legendary it is, but I never see it. Like I basically never see it that way. I see Demetrius Andrade in a very similar light. Everyone always tells me how that dude is, an A-grade fighter and how, he's so slick and all that. But did you see his performance against Liam Williams? Did you see his performance over Vanis Martirosyan? It's like, don't get me wrong, Demetrius Andrade is a decent fighter. I'm not trying to disrespect him, but when people put him on this Floyd Mayweather Jr. level, I've already said this. I don't even think Andrade, in terms of slickness and in terms of boxing IQ, I don't even think he's on the same level as a primary Sonny Lara. But that's just me. It is what it is.
Bivol beats all three of those guys, and I think Joe Smith possibly beats all three of those guys. Canelo Alvarez, 57 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws, 39 big wins by way of knockout, 31 years of age, 5'8" with a 70-inch arm reach. So Joe Smith is going to have a 4-inch height advantage with he got 76-inch arms, so he got a 6-inch arm reach advantage. He has the power advantage. Okay, Arthur Beterbiev is the smaller of the guys. He is 5'11" and a half with a 74-inch arm reach, so he's equivalent to just about Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders. And then that leads you into Dimitri Bivol, he has a very wiry frame, out of the guys, so that's where, his toughest challenge is going to lie. So Dimitri.
Blue Blood Sports TV says all in all that Dimitri Bivol is going to be his biggest challenge. I can't see where he's coming from there because Dimitri Bivol is a person that he's not only going to be bigger than Canelo, not maybe because he is bigger, maybe it can make it more difficult for Canelo, or maybe it can make it easier for him. We'll have to see what happens because sometimes the bigger the opponent, the easier they are to hit because the bigger of a target they are. So I can understand certain people saying, well, he should still face Andrade and those guys because they're similar in size because, styles make fights at the end of the day. Certain people's physical dimensions, it still can be more challenging for them. But like I said, Andrade and Charlo and Benavidez, I think that all those guys are very good fighters, but I don't think that they're the challenge that what a Dimitri Bivol or Beterbiev are. Because I think those guys, they know how to handle themselves in the ring. Those guys are real A-grade fighters. It is what it is. I think that Andrade, Charlo, and Benavidez, I think all those guys are A-grade fighters too. But, even if you were to just take the blue blood, route, and if you were to talk about, would any of those fighters beat Artur Beterbiev, I don't personally think any of those fighters beat Artur Beterbiev. But, that's my view.
Bivol, 19 wins. No.
But Dimitri Bivol, he's a very interesting challenge because Bivol is a person with very fast feet. He has very fast hands. He has very decent power. He has a very extensive amateur background. That fight's going to be very interesting.
Lost, no draws. He is 31 wins, 31 years of age, 6 feet tall with a 72-inch arm reach. So Dimitri Bivol is a better athlete. He's just slightly taller than Artur Beterbiev, but he has a shorter arm reach than Artur Beterbiev. So with that said, Dimitri Bivol, he's just a better athlete. He's a better mover, better pure boxer. But again, I still think Canelo Alvarez, he beats Dimitri Bivol as well. Okay, so this is Canelo Alvarez's opportunity to create history. Okay, Canelo Alvarez is looking to become the greatest Mexican fighter in the history of the sport of boxing. And this is another accomplishment for Canelo.
If Canelo Alvarez were able to completely unify the 175-pound division, this is my opinion, he more than likely would become the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Because, at least debatably, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., I think, is always going to have the place in that conversation for most people. But Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, if he actually were able to unify that division, especially with Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol being undefeated, if he's able to defeat both of them, I think that Canelo Alvarez, at least no question, would have to debatably be in that conversation. As of right now, I still have Chavez Sr. just because of what all he's accomplished as the #1 overall Mexican boxer of all time. But if Canelo were able to unify 175, he would probably surpass Chavez Sr. in my opinion. In my opinion. There's a certain amount of people that would disagree, but it is what it is.
Alvarez to attempt to achieve that. Okay, this is a fight where Canelo. This is a weight class he become undisputed. in light heavyweight and undisputed at super middleweight, and then he could go up the cruiserweight. So imagine if Canelo Alvarez becomes undisputed at super middleweight, becomes undisputed at light heavyweight, and he beats the best there. Now I still want to see him fight David Benavidez, because I think that David Benavidez was the best super middleweight in the world, okay, and he didn't get that fight.
Well, I think that he was very physically talented, but in terms of skills, I don't think that he has the skill set to defeat Canelo Alvarez. But I understand why a certain amount of people want to see that fight. You know, some would debate that he's more talented than Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith. I certainly would understand that. You know, I just personally don't think that David Benavidez, I don't think that he has the defense. I don't think all in all that he has the chin. I don't think David Benavidez has a bad chin, but he can be hurt. And I just think that he gets hit a little bit too often. I don't think that he has a great head movement. Once again, I think he's another one of these. But like I said, there are certain Mexican fighters out there that when I watch them, they appear to be talented, but they seem to have some of the flaws that some other Mexican fighters within history have had. You know, maybe not the best of feet, maybe overall not the best of head movement, you know, when it comes down to it. David Benavidez is one of those Mexican fighters. He's never going to get the award for head movement or footwork of the year. You know, it is what it is. So it's whatever.
But these are still great accomplishments on the part of...
Now, of course, neither is Artur Beterbiev. But what makes Artur Beterbiev, in my opinion, a little bit different is that Artur Beterbiev does have high boxing IQ. He knows his limitations. He has better defensive responsibility than that of a David Benavidez. He has decently more power. And I believe all around he's more bigger than David Benavidez, or he's bigger than him. So that's a very interesting fight.
Canelo Alvarez. And I think that Canelo Alvarez will win, you know, all of these fights. But again, these are not cherry-picked fights by no stretch of the imagination. And so...
Hey, well, Blue Blood Sports TV, let me give you a lot of credit there. Because if you were really trying to promote a certain narrative, when it comes down to it, you could have went out here, just like another one of these channels that I see, and you could have said that, you know, Canelo Alvarez, that he's clearly avoiding the top-tier competition just to face these guys. Let me give you credit there.
These guys land one punch on...
Because I already know overall with Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV and those other channels, I already know overall what they're going to say.
Canelo Alvarez with this weight class, and that could be all she wrote. So, but imagine if Canelo Alvarez becomes undisputed in two separate weight classes, goes up to cruiserweight, and becomes a champion at cruiserweight. Well, he's a 5-division world champion at that point in time, and undisputed in two separate weight classes. That speaks volumes. So that was...
I agree. And I believe the next fight actually is going to be over Ilunga Makabu. But I believe all in all that after that, he more than likely is going to face Joe Smith Jr. But we'll see what happens.
Solidify him. So let's see how this unfolds. But it was very predictable. You can see this coming a mile away. But that's all I got for y'all, man. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section.
But anyways, that's really about it for today. Personally, what do I think the next move should be? Whether Canelo is going to face Joe Smith Jr. or Makabu. Personally, in my opinion, actually, I believe that Canelo Alvarez should go after Makabu first. Because I think that that is a great opportunity. And I think out of any other cruiserweights, at least at the current moment in time, I believe that Makabu at least is your ticket to be a 5-weight division champion. That's why I compared that to a Roy Jones Jr. versus John Ruiz situation. You know, so it is what it is. But anyways, that's really about it for this video today. Let me give Blue Blood Sports TV some credit for, in my opinion, at least being somewhat logical and objective. Now, is that me saying that I believe that he's logical and objective just because overall we had the same opinions? Not necessarily. But I think all in all, once again, I do pride myself for having a realistic scope on things. And I do think all in all that if Canelo Alvarez is to unify the light heavyweight division, all those fights, in my opinion, are great fights. No doubt about it. And big challenges. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.